This morning, Ivo introduced us to the new paradigm thinking which had been emerging from the physical sciences. I think I can say with some confidence that similar lines of thinking were already being evolved in the legal sciences and in the social sciences. And when Gary raised the question of the role of human subjectivity in economics, in politics, and law, and so on, the obvious question was, well, how did this emerge to the level of serious intellectual discourse and debate? And frankly, the idea of our understanding of the human personality is relatively recent. We only began to understand this at the latter part of the 19th century with Freud and some of the others, when we understood that what we call the human subjectivity is encased in unconscious drives of emotional energy, directed at needs and values, and the public interest. So the personality is a rather complex combination of a number of different forces that are energized. And so that itself raised the question of what is the role of human subjectivity in economics, in politics, and in law? It's a continuing debate. At the back of this debate is a philosophy known as positivism. And it was Hume who stated the notion that statements about what ought to be norms, values, are scientifically meaningless. So that if you want to have a serious scientific discourse about economics, preclude the notion of values. The same applied to law, the same applied to politics. In law, it became known as the conventional theory of law, and the fundamental principle was to preclude the study of values from the expression of law as a dominant jurisprudential discourse. Now, I mention that because that remains a very challenging idea, certainly in law. We've had a number of the fellows of the Academy try to shift that paradigm of law to understand law, not in narrow, simplistic terms of sovereignty, but in terms of the global situation as a whole. Richard Falk, one of our fellows, wrote a very famous article on the new paradigm of law and legal education, in which he looks at the idea that the fundamental change in the way we look at law should be to adequately account for the human being as a choice maker, as an influencer, as a consumer of the product of law. But the same idea would apply to politics, and the same idea would apply to other fields as well. That's still a discourse that is considered, according to our theorists, dangerous knowledge. No one in official circles wants to know this. They don't want to understand that when we have these consequences, this is what might happen. So we don't really have that intellectual discourse. And when you do come out of the box, as climate science has done, to say, look, there are consequences to what we do, then we denigrate the bearers of the message. And so what we have here then is not only the notion of scientific, if you like, rationality, which includes values, but we have an immense resistance to it. And that is a problem because in economics in particular, there's been emergence of a new normal, the neoliberal economy, and it works on principles that are not sustainable. Everyone agrees they're not sustainable, and my opinion is that neoliberalism, unrestrained, will undo capitalism as we know it. So we have a problem there. And so we also have a problem with law because since 1945 we've had a global constitution. I know of only one or two leaders in the world that have ever admitted that we have a global constitution. Meaning we have the constitution there, but we can ignore it when we choose to ignore it, as Mr. Putin did when he invaded the Crimea. And so we are still fighting for the very basic ideas, the acceptance of the notion that politics, law, and economics ought to be constrained by some standards, some objective standards. We can distill these standards very clearly, but they still resist. You end up, if you say, well, it would be useful if human rights and political economy had some connection with each other, and then you'd be regarded as a subversive, as a crazy, as a nutcase, and so on. So this clearly is a challenge. In the field of economics in particular, what has caught my attention is the vociferous advocacy of this narrow view and the dismissal of anything else that essentially focuses purely on the notion of wealth maximization, regardless of its consequences, regardless of its implications for political economy, for law, and so forth. So we have an immense challenge, not only of scientific rationality, but how to generate the processes by which these views can find space in the arenas that do matter as a global context. Thank you.